will begin, and I understand that Dylan is going to be introducing. Am I correct?
Well, let me set the stage here.
Please.
And thank you all for facilitating this on your end. What we'll do here is I'm going to have our two common students and our Arizona NUS interns introduce the session, just to give you a sense of possible future collaborations in teaching, in research, and in outreach between the Middle East Institute here and the University of Arizona SYSMEC project. So we'll have Chui Ko, who is a National University of Singapore student, introduce the session. Then we'll turn it over to Dylan Vaughn, who's going to be a Middle East intern at the NUS this summer, introduce our three speakers. And then we'll turn it back over to you, Mike, if that's all right, to introduce the individual papers.
Okay.
And to chair the session and to coordinate the questions on that end.
Okay, I'll act as sort of gatekeeper and referee, and maybe I'll make a couple of comments here and there, but not too many. So
very good. Well, let me introduce then Chui Ko, who is our exchange student from the National University of Singapore, and a wonderful student who's taken the absolute record number of classes ever taken by any student at the University of Arizona, and has made a wonderful impression here, and will be one of the bridges between our two institutions. So, inshallah.
Okay, quite a short speech. Good morning. I'm an NUS undergraduate, currently on a full-year exchange program at the University of Arizona. In my first year at NUS, I had petitioned hard for NUS to increase its contacts with universities in the Middle East. I wrote to personnel in various departments in the NUS administration. I made numerous office visits, and I wrote into the Straits Times, our national newspaper. When I saw that institutional change was not going to take place at the ideal rate, I behaved like any pragmatic Singaporean would and applied instead for an exchange program to a US university that had an established and well-respected Near Eastern Studies program. 2 years later, I am now at the University of Arizona, finishing up my second semester. In my 2 semesters here, I have taken 10 modules under the auspices of the NEF department.
We've lost your audio.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay, sure.
Yep.
Oh, is this the mic? Okay. So I attended numerous lectures here and panel discussions, notably the first ever SYSMEC panel discussion in January as a response to the tumultuous events in the Middle East. Inspired by the active NEF department here at the U of A, I applied for an internship with the Middle East Institute at NUS, my home university. In a separate and totally serendipitous development, it turns out that NUS had managed to hire the highly esteemed Professor Michael Hudson to be the director of the Middle East Institute. 5 months after I first contacted the Middle East Institute about my internship, I was then pleasantly surprised to find out that his daughter, Professor Layla Hudson, was a faculty member here at the U of A, as well as the initiator and director of SYSMEC, the Southwest Initiative for the Study of Middle East Conflict. It is indeed a very small world for small places like Tucson and Singapore. Other than these anecdotal accounts, which for the more spiritual or superstitious amongst us suggest a greater cosmological force or kismet blessing the further cooperation of both institutions, there are also real empirical reasons for why MEI and SYSMEC ought to work even closer together. SYSMEC is comprised of graduate students who are taught by world-class faculty and possess the expertise on the Middle East that NUS just does not have at the moment. MEI, however, is located in Singapore and Greater Asia, which has historical links with the Middle East that predate the Europeans' arrival in the Americas. There is a significant Arab minority from the Hadrami diaspora in Singapore, and the Singaporean government also shares close ties with the Middle Eastern states, ties that are the Jewel Muscat, for example, was a joint effort by the governments of Singapore and Oman, and this brings us to the topic of the SYSMEC talk for today, Oman. Thank you, and I'll let the next speaker take over.
Thank you very much. That's a terrific opening.
Okay.
All right, and now Dylan, who will be an intern in Singapore in the summer, will introduce our 3 speakers for today.
Thank you. As Dr. Hudson said, my name is Dylan Vaughn. I'm a research associate for SYSMAC and a PhD student in the Near Eastern Studies Department. And I will introduce our very fine panelists today, who will all talk about a very interesting and developing issue, the issue of Oman, dealing both historically, in terms of foreign policy, and in terms of security issues. So first I would like to introduce Dr. J.E. Peterson. Dr. Peterson is a historical political analyst specializing in the contemporary Arabian Peninsula and Gulf. He's taught at various American universities and been connected with research institutes on both sides of the Atlantic. His publications include a dozen books on history and politics in Oman and Yemen, Saudi Arabia's history and security, Gulf security, Middle Eastern oil, political participation in the Gulf, historical Muscat, and insurgency and counterinsurgency in Oman, as well as some 40 scholarly articles and 20 chapters in edited books. He also worked for the U.S. government and in the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister for Security and Defense in the Sultanate of Oman. Dr. Peterson, thanks for joining us. Also, second presenter will be Ambassador David Dunford. Ambassador Dunford retired from the U.S. Foreign Service in 1995 following completion of his assignment as Ambassador to the Sultanate of Oman. He served from 1988 to 1992 in Saudi Arabia as Deputy Ambassador, including 15 months as Acting Ambassador there. Ambassador Dunford is an adjunct instructor at the University of Arizona, where he teaches courses on the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Middle East environment. From April to June 2003, he worked for the Organization of Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance, and later for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad, as Senior Ministerial Liaison to Iraq's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Dunford, thanks for joining us. And then last will be Johan Chacko. Johan Chacko is an MA candidate at the University of Arizona's Near Eastern Studies Department and an assistant SMAC. He has previously worked in the private sector as an open source analyst focusing on military conflicts and taught political science at Christ University's School of Law in Bangalore, India. He has spent time living and traveling in Oman and the UAE as part of the Indian diaspora, the British expatriate community, and as a student of the Middle East. Johan, thanks for joining us.
All right. So I think we're ready to start, and I think we'll start with Dr. Peterson's talk. If you're ready for that, Mike?
We're ready, and we're looking forward. And good morning to John Peterson, and Ambassador Dunford, and to Johan. Very nice to see you, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
It sounds a bit strange to say it, but good morning to you. Let me start off by saying that Oman is perhaps the least noticed country in the Middle East. It's rarely visited by journalists. It rarely makes the news. It's a quiet, placid country. Visitors inevitably comment on how well organized it is and how friendly Omani people are, how clean the capital Muscat is. I'm always amused by the comment of a Danish journalist some years ago who called it an Islamic California. Which there may be some element of truth in that, but it's stretching things. 2011 so far has been a momentous year in Oman because it has been touched by the so-called Arab Spring, just like many of the other countries in the region. Not as much, but still, this is unusual for Oman. The last time that there were protests and demonstrations of this size and duration was probably 1972. Who are these people? Well, it started in Sohar, which is a regional town several hundred kilometers to the west of Muscat. The town has been targeted as the center of Oman's industrial development base. These protesters took over the global roundabout, which is on the main road, and held it for some time until dispersed by police. There were other demonstrations in Muscat, the capital, including a continuing sit-down at the premises of the Majlis Ashura, which is the elected consultative body of the country. Other protests broke out in the interior, and most recently there have been massive demonstrations in Salalah on consecutive Fridays. Salalah is the principal town of the southern region of Dhofar. What do these people want? They don't want to overthrow the government. They don't want a new ruler, as happened in Tunisia or Egypt. They're not even as forceful in their demands as the people protesting in Bahrain. Basically, their complaints have centered on the lack of economic opportunities. And since most of these people are young, the lack of job prospects, they resent the wealth of the elite and call for people to corruption. They want a say in the running of their government, something they really haven't had. Sultan has met these by having the police disperse the protesters. There have been a few fatalities. As far as I'm aware, these really have occurred through the police use of tear gas, and of rubber bullets, which are tactics used by police forces in the United States and in most Western European countries as well, and supposedly non-lethal, but that's always true. More importantly, in the long run, perhaps, he has promised to increase social benefits for unemployed and other things, to create 50,000 new jobs for these youth. He has sacked about a dozen high officials and ministers in his cabinet, and he has promised to expand the powers of the court, which really hasn't, it's been advisory more than anything else, although there have been no details of what actually he is going to do. Now, I think the way to understand what is happening, to me, this is not surprising. These kinds of grievances have been building up for a very long time, and they've been mostly swept under the rug by the regime. The reason they came out now is because they've had inspiration elsewhere. Now, how do these grievances arrive? What is not gone correct in Oman? Both political and economic. Political, Oman, unlike the other monarchies in the Gulf, is really a one-man operation. President Sultan Qaboos took over in a palace coup, overthrowing his traditionalist and isolated father in 1970. He was 30 years old. He'd been educated in England. He passed out from Sandhurst. He had been kept in a house in Salalah by his father. I should mention that his father moved to Salalah. It's a very pleasant place. In 1958, he never went back to his capital. Qaboos was born in Salalah. His mother comes from a tribal family of the mountains around Salalah. And after he became Sultan in 1970, he made a triumphant entry into Muscat, which was the first time in his life he'd ever been in Muscat. And it was the first time that he'd met any members of his paternal family, the family that has ruled Oman for 200 years. So here was a young man who had no experience, had training, military training, but he had no experience, and who was he going to rely upon? Well, he relied upon some trusted British advisors, one of whom stayed with him for many years until his death a couple of years ago. He relied upon some Omanis who had come back from exile to assist him. Most of these had limited education and experience. He relied upon Zanzibari Omanis, who were, it's a term that's used for those people of Omani origin who lived, in some cases were born in Zanzibar and other parts of East and Central Africa, and came back after the revolution in Zanzibar and leaked to the Gulf and Arab world, and they were prized because they had education and sometimes experience, whereas most Omanis did not in 1970 and throughout the 70s. But he also had to rely upon some pretty shady people. One was a former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury who introduced a Saudi and a Libyan who were useful in such things as making a rapprochement with Faisal and Saudi Arabia, something that the two countries had had no relations ever before that. but also were clearly in Oman to make lots of money. And many of the Omanis that the Sultan used to staff his government and become his ministers, they used the government in the same way, as a way to increase or to build personal fortune of it. And a lot of these in the early days didn't have much experience. For example, the Minister of Oil had been the son of a small merchant in Salalah who had supplied the Sultan with their necessary requirements. And his son was made Minister of Oil and stayed in that position for over 2 decades. And started a large number of companies and graduated as a very wealthy man. The other
We're losing your audio for a moment.
What?
Luckily, we have the video conference engineers here with us, so they should be able to get it up and running soon.
Okay.
Or we have Glenn. Oh, and the picture's better too.
Okay, I think you're back.
Okay, great. And we were wondering if you would be able to mute your side, because we're getting interference back from your side.
Okay.
Turn off the...
Just during the actual presentations, and then we'll turn it back on for the interaction afterwards.
Okay.
Turn it off.
Okay. Is that better now?
No, I mean, that mic's still on, but the big mics are... Yeah, the speakers are off. And then that one, just, if you can turn it down.
We have to be able to hear them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Just turn the mic volume down on that.
The mic
That's what I
volume
was-
down, but keep the speakers
Yeah.
out.
Okay, go ahead.
captive audience, they can't complain about anything I say.
I think we're hearing you again.
Okay,
They're hearing you too, they're not getting it.
go ahead.
If you turn down the volume...
I was about to say that
That's what I
the
was saying.
Sultan is a very,
No, where's,
doesn't
The
make
microphone.
friends easily, he doesn't rely upon a lot of people. In many ways, he's thought to be aloof from what's going on, and he tends to put off decisions, and then when he makes them, no one has an idea what's coming, why it's coming, who's been appointed, many of these other things, which increases distance between him and his people.
Can you turn up
The
the
other
speaker volume?
thing that is a factor in these protests and grievances is the economic
Can you turn up the
situation.
speaker volume down so we can hear
Before
it?
1970, Oman was a very poor country. It relied on subsistence, agriculture, and fishing. Since then, the population has grown by leaps and bounds with population growth rates of 3 to 4% a year, although that's calmed down a bit in recent years. Since 1970, the country has depended upon oil revenues. Now, Oman has been a producer since the very late 60s. It is not a member of OPEC or OAPEC, the Arab organization. And it isn't a mega producer like some of the other states in the Gulf. They peaked out in oil production at just under 1 million barrels a day a few years ago. It's been dropping steadily, although they've been using secondary and tertiary techniques in order to increase it. It's a good thing the price of oil went up because these are very expensive techniques, and they extend the life a bit, but they won't keep it forever. And Oman has tried to diversify by natural gas. They've set up liquefied natural gas exports to the Far East, and they've been successful, but they've reached the limit. In fact, now they have to import natural gas from Qatar in order to feed their own industrial schemes. And natural gas would never have replaced oil income. And the second problem with it is that if, like oil, it is capital intensive, and therefore it doesn't employ very many people. So Oman has also tried to encourage tourism. They've opened up the country in the last decade or so, whereas it was very difficult to get there in the past. Tourism is very helpful because it requires a lot of people. in hotels, in restaurants, in car rentals, and all kinds of things. But again, it will never replace oil as the main income, and so the government has turned to other strategies such as the industrial development around Sohar. The problem is that there isn't a lot of money to go around. And Oman, unlike some of the other countries in the Gulf, is larger, has a larger population in relative terms, and much more rugged topography. The Sultan, the government, have done very well at putting social welfare net of free education, free hospital, health care, and so forth. The quality is spotty, but at least it is there. But in terms of improving people's lives, it is better than many places in Asia or Africa, for example, but it doesn't compare to elsewhere in the Gulf. And this is noticed by the population, who know that Muscat has grown to be a large, modern metropolis with a lot of prosperity, a lot of very big houses. And this is resented. And the Sultan's aloofness and his seeming wastefulness at times has also been resented. And that's why they called for the removal of people who they accused of being guilty of corruption, and there's still been demands that they should be tried, which I don't see happening. The 50,000 jobs that the Sultan promised, I have no idea where he's going to get them, because there are 50 to 60,000 secondary school graduates every year, and the amount of jobs available, the government filled up years ago, civilian side. Security forces are full. Some people would say they're bloated. They're very large in a country of one size. Where's going to find 50,000 jobs? The private sector has absorbed nearly as many as they can. They still rely upon expatriates from South and Southeast Asia. But there aren't a lot of opportunities there. The expansion of the Majlis, the dismissal of ministers and so forth, some of these were well overdue. These people have been in positions for many, many years. None of them were very close to the Sultan, and none were from his immediate family, and they're replaced by other people, some of them younger, some of them not younger, a really mixed bag. And it seems it was done more as a sop than any meaningful change. What will happen with the Majlis Shura? We don't know. I don't expect a lot to happen. People are also worried in Oman because the Sultan is now 70 years old. He has no direct heirs, and he has said nothing about succession, and this worries people. Presumably, one of his nephews, cousins, will succeed because it's a very small family and there aren't many good candidates. But we don't know which one. We don't even know whether that will happen. So the future is pretty clouded. I don't think that the unrest is going to go any farther, and I'm a bit surprised it's lasted as long as it has. But these problems are just going to continue indefinitely as far as I can see.
Thank you very much. I guess we can introduce how would you like to handle questions? Would you like to take questions directly after each particular talk, or would you like to wait until the end?
I think we'd prefer to wait until the end, if you don't
Okay.
mind, because we'd like to hear from everybody.
Okay.
I've just been handed a note that one of our colleagues here in the room in Singapore is Mr. Mushahid Ali, who is the former Chargé of Singapore and Saudi Arabia and Ambassador to Cambodia, who wants to convey to Ambassador Dunford his warm greetings. Mushahid, where are you? There you are. Yeah, can we get him?
They're working on it.
Can we get him on the screen just for a second?
They're working on it.
Okay.
I don't know what they're doing, but they're.
He's on this side of the room.
All right.
Anyway.
Well, greetings back at you, Excellency.
Good to see the mansion.
Not over the airwaves.
Okay.
There we go.
There he is. There he is. Okay.
How are you, sir?
Hi, thank you. How are you?
Okay.
Well,
All right, very good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that excellent presentation. And we're looking forward to the next one.
All right. I think now we'll hear from Ambassador Dunford talking about the foreign and regional policies of Oman.
something like that. Good morning,
And good evening.
Michael. It's good to see you again.
Indeed.
I remember seeing you at my home in Oman some years ago. I won't say how many. And shipped an internet connection, which was a exotic thing to have in those days.
Indeed. Indeed. Very nice to have you with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Can we have you go back on mute before Ambassador Dunford starts speaking, just so we have less interference?
Okay. Ian, can you do that?
Yes,
Okay,
I've
give
done
my
it.
thumbs.
Okay. All
All
right.
right. Cut me off if I go too long, but I just want to make some introductory remarks before I talk about foreign policy. I tried to explain to Washington when I was ambassador there that Oman is not just another particularly less affluent Gulf Arab country. It's got very distinctive traditions, African and Asian influences, the only Western educated monarch, a proud seafaring tradition. I think I've seen the ship that sailed into Singapore. It has memories of empire stretching from the coast of Pakistan to East Africa. And I also tried to explain to my bosses that it doesn't pay to manage relations with Oman.
We're using.
Love the mountains, much like Tucson, except they're made of, the ones near Muscat are made of ophiolite, which comes from the bottom of the sea through some sort of tectonic plate action. So they're really remarkable. It's got, or it had, at least when I was there, a long, unspoiled coastline, beautiful beaches and quiet coves. I hope it still does. And it has very friendly and distinctively dressed people. Important things to recognize are that history stood still from about the middle of the 19th century until 1970, when Sultan Qaboos took over from his dad. He's an Anglophile, but very determined, I think, that Oman's political development be based on Omani traditions and values. One thing I would say is that Oman's stability is probably far too closely tied to one commodity, oil, and one 70-year-old monarch whose health may be wonderful, but it's hard to tell from this far away. All right, foreign policy. Under Qaboos, Oman's foreign policy has been pragmatic, independent. As John mentioned, they stayed out of OPEC, but reversing the isolation that the Sultan's father curried. They see as the key to long-term security and prosperity, maintaining dialogue with everybody, good relations with all its neighbors. If you want to break diplomatic relations with Oman, it's very difficult. While I was there, I had, unlike my colleagues in other parts of the Arabian Gulf, I had almost daily contact with the Iraqi ambassador and the Iranian ambassador, and these were two countries which we had no diplomatic relations with. I wasn't allowed to say anything meaningful, but I did, because I was brought into contact with them by the constant events where all ambassadors had to attend. It was necessary to be polite, to shake hands. Oman did what it took, even ceding territory if necessary, to settle all of its border disputes with its neighbors, with Yemen, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, and arguably with Iran. There's no doubt about its Arab and Muslim credentials, but the Arab-Israeli dispute has never been central to Omani consciousness. Perhaps they're geographically too far removed, and plus they don't have a large, if any, number of diaspora Palestinians. So they were free to pioneer sort of opening up contacts with the Israelis, and that's one thing that happened on my watch. This was the time of the Oslo peace process, the famous handshake between Arafat and Rabin, and we persuaded the Omanis to host a multilateral peace process meeting on water resources, and that led to the creation of the Middle East Desalination Research Center, which remarkably, given how bad Arab-Israeli relations have deteriorated over the last years, is still under operation in Muscat and still has Israelis on the board and still does projects in cooperation with Israel. And the following year, Yitzhak Rabin visited Oman, called on the Sultan. And so those were times when the Israelis, I think, were very excited about opening up the possibilities of travel to and business with the Gulf. Unfortunately, Oman still maintains a very low level of contact, but it's subject to the overall political climate. So Oman has done a very successful balancing act. I guess we're going to talk more about the military, but it features a military relationship with the United States. It features membership in the GCC, including its security apparatus, and it features normal relations with Iran. I would say Oman grudgingly attends GCC meetings on security, but doesn't consider the GCC key to its security. It relies on the UK and increasingly on the United States. And I think John made the point that British military officers ran Oman's military until probably the mid-80s. I think Oman understands the U.S. as the only world power really capable of deterring regional threats. I think Oman is also concerned that the United States might not be that reliable over the long run. You guys are beginning to blur, so I hope you can still hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. Economic security, I would say it's much more tied, Oman has economic relations with Europe and the United States, but much more tied to the Indian Ocean littoral states and to Asia, India, China, and of course increasingly Singapore. Oman takes international law very seriously. When I was in Muscat, Oman was the Arab representative on the UN Security Council, which meant we had discussions about issues worldwide, protecting whales to environmental issues and things like that. They joined the WTO in 2000, so that has led to some changes, I think, in their economic regulations. And finally, they signed the U.S. and Oman signed a free trade agreement in 2009. I'm not quite sure whether that's still operational yet, but seems to be fine. So the U.S. and the U.K. remain most important international allies, but relationships with Asian countries, including India, and China, and Singapore, are probably going to continue to strengthen. Just a little bit about U.S.-Omani relations. They go all the way back to a treaty of friendship and commerce in 1833, and an Omani ship sailed into New York City in 1840, which obviously they were dressed fairly exotically for New York City residents, and it made quite a stir. But then, as I said, history stood still, and the U.S. Embassy was not established in Oman until 1972. At that time, right downtown where the Sultan's Palace is, the UK Embassy was right next to the Sultan's Palace. Both have since been moved out, so that Oman is obviously more independent. Oman signed a military access agreement with us in 1980, and we have since then invested hundreds of millions of dollars in facilities on 3 of their air bases. The one in Sib, which is it's essentially the international airport. Masira and Thumrait. Masira is an island off the coast of Oman. Thumrait is in the interior north of Salalah. And unlike most of our facilities throughout the Gulf, there's real strategic depth in Masira and Thumrait. And I think working with the Omani military, which is very professional by Gulf standards, And the investment we made was validated by Oman's cooperation both in 1990 and 91, the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and also our operations in Afghanistan after 2001. Part of the deal for the military bases, and maybe this is just sour grapes on my part, but was a joint economic commission with the Omanis, which included a U.S. AID program, Agency for International Development. But during my watch, that AID program was cut off, which pretty much shocked the Omanis. It took a visit by then Vice President Gore to repair the damage. He left a check for $3 million, I think, for the Desalination Research Center. So the relationship continued, the military access continues. Just briefly, relations with Oman's neighbors. Yemen's long been a source of concern, going back to when South Yemen was the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. Yemen was supportive of a rebellion in the Dhofar region, South Oman. Recently, given the events in Yemen, I think Oman has tightened security on their border to prevent a lot of refugees from coming across. I was there during a civil war between the North and the South, 1994. Oman gave refuge, or what's the right word, asylum for the South Yemen leader, Ali Salam al-Dib. I think he was recently just kicked out, though, for not following the rules about being non-political. Relations with the UAE, which is obviously to travel to the Musandam, to the Strait of Hormuz, you have to go through the UAE. Oman is not totally contiguous. But relations with the UAE have been strained recently because there's a reported network of UAE spies uncovered in Oman. So I think there's also rumors, which I would discount, that UAE has something to do with the demonstrations in Oman. There's a tendency by all Middle Eastern rulers to blame foreign agitation for their domestic problems. Iran, we've noticed a lot of increased activity over the last couple of years, and I think that's largely to balance Oman's obvious military relationship with the U.S., their obvious military relationship with the GCC. Oman is concerned that the nuclear dispute between the U.S. and Iran will involve them or happen over their heads. They're also concerned more recently by the Saudi intervention in Bahrain and the fact that the Saudis and the Iranians might get into a real dust-up over Bahrain. So I think the Omanis are demonstrating that to the Iranians, probably at Iranian insistence, that they step up their economic and military ties to Iran. So you've seen a lot of visible stuff. For example, Iran is not a major trading partner with Oman. But Sultan Qaboos visited in 2009, which is a big deal. There's an Iran trade center in Muscat. Oman hosted a trade exposition in February, and planned to, at least on paper, set up a trade center itself in Tehran. On the military side, a lot more visibility in terms of joint exercises. There are obvious reasons why Oman and Iran need to talk to each other on the military side. They share the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of potential for conflict there. They need to de-conflict their military movements there. And also there's a fairly significant amount of smuggling, which much of which I think
We lost you there for a moment. Yeah. Are we back? Okay. If you can hear us, we cannot hear you, and you're frozen on our screen at the moment. Let's see if we can do something about that.
Should I disconnect and reconnect?
We've lost the connection. Okay.
We're back, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
All right, let's continue then. We'll pick right up where we left off.
All right, I decided to finish with that. Oh.
Okay, we ended at smuggling.
All right, I was talking about Iran and Oman. There's quite a bit of smuggling across the strait, tobacco and things like that. But both sides, I think, want to keep criminal activity down to what my father used to call a steady roar. The last thing I'd say about Oman and Iran is there's real potential if Iran maintains its relationship with all parties. There's real potential for Oman to act as a bridge between Iran and the West. We've seen that to a certain extent when Oman intervened in the 3 hikers that were imprisoned in Iran and managed to help one of them get out. What to say about Saudi Arabia? I think Oman has been happy over the years that it's hard to get from Saudi Arabia to Oman and vice versa. Although I understand that they're working on a road now, which may make it easier. But the Saudi-Omani relationship has always been correct, but I don't think either side has ever been totally comfortable with the other because of the difference in religions, the puritanical versus more moderate body Islam, the more cosmopolitan sense you have in Muscat versus the Nejd in Riyadh. Having lived in both places, I never felt a great warmth. I think I'll just leave it there and turn it over to Johan.
Well, thank you very much, David.
Yeah, sure.
That was really excellent and helpful. Yes, Leila?
Great, thank you very much. We actually have a message across your screen. I don't know if your tech people can remove the message that
It'll fade out.
will fade out. It's okay, it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so
Okay.
we'll hear from Johan, inshallah.
Yes, and his presentation title is Oman and the Indian Ocean Region System, Putting Security and Economic Development Strategies in Context.
Hello, everyone. I think both of my previous co-panelists have touched on many of the things that I'm going to say within their talks, but I'd like to pull those different strands together. I think, as I said earlier, Oman functions geopolitically, both in the contemporary period and historically, in a couple of contexts. One is the Arabian Peninsula, but the other is the Indian Ocean. And there have been times when Oman has been a confident, seafaring nation, and other times when it's become unstable at home and sort of withdrawn to focus inwardly. I think I'd like to look at the transition that Oman is making to once again a seafaring nation that is deeply involved in the Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea areas. From about this 17th century onwards, Oman went through a period of, for about 200 years, Oman went through a period of maritime expansion. In fact, displaced and kicked out the Portuguese as the dominant naval power in the western Indian Ocean, along the east coast of Africa and up to the
Lost you there for a minute.
I hope that's 1958. In fact,
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, okay.
In fact, for a while, the capital of the empire was in Zanzibar. There was a period of withdrawal from about the mid-19th century until about 1970. But even during this period, there were very deep links across the Indian Ocean. Part of this was through the British, but even after independence, India's independence, only 2 countries maintained diplomatic relations with Oman, India and the United Kingdom. And the Indian rupee was actually the official currency of Oman, and the Gulf rupee remained the currency until about 1970. The current reorientation of Oman is something that has been taking place for a couple of different reasons. One is the changing strategic picture in the Persian Gulf, and the other is the economic pressures of the growing population and dwindling oil reserves. Oman sits astride both the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf of Aden, as mentioned earlier, two of the most critical energy choke points in the world. And its role as an island of stability and as a critical Western security partner has been sort of taken for granted in many ways for the last 30 years. And it's often been, as Ambassador Dunford said, as lumped in with its GCC neighbors. But Oman's strategy in the post-Cold War, post-Saddam era has been undergoing a distinctive process of transformation in the face of a changing mix of threats and opportunities. When we look at Oman's evolving military posture, taken in conjunction with the range of its defense relationships, the value and type of its arms purchases, the nature and intensity of joint military exercises, overseas military education, etc., we can see how the Sultan is pursuing changing Omani interests in a changing world while minimizing the geopolitical and fiscal risks both to his regime and the country as a whole. As Dr. Peterson mentioned, Oman is attempting to transition from almost total dependence on energy exports to a more private sector-driven economy that involves tourism, trade, industry. But at the same time, instability around Oman is intensifying, whether it's in Yemen, with not just the current Arab Spring, but multiple rebellions and insurgencies, the U.S.-led confrontation with Iran, the growth of Somali piracy in the Gulf of Aden, and the three-way tensions between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, which have at times threatened to spill into the Arabian Sea. Not to mention some national separatism in Iranian and Pakistani Baluchistan. So as you can see, it's a challenging environment. How is Oman reacting to this? Well, with the construction of the new air base at Musanna, purchases of F-16 fighters from the United States, Harif-class corvettes and Typhoon jets from the UK, it's clear that Oman seeks an enhanced capacity to secure the sea lanes in its own waters while maintaining its defense relationships with the West. On the other hand, Oman's diminishing oil reserves, its unique sectarian needs, and here again, I think the Badi aspect is important because they don't share the sort of Sunni anxieties that are very dominant in the way that, for example, Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi perceive the Iranian, challenge. It's not something that frightens them in quite the same way, because they don't have much of a Shia minority, and they lack some of those sectarian feelings. Oman's defense ties with non-Arab littoral states is growing. India in particular, but also Pakistan and Iran, as mentioned. And as the GCC has become increasingly focused on Iran, Oman's engagement with the GCC on security issues has taken a back step. This is in some ways different from the early 80s when there was a perceived threat of Soviet expansion into the Indian Ocean, and even in the 90s when, Gulf states lack the capacity to secure the approaches to Oman's sea lanes, and are unlikely to actually initiate or decisively win the conflicts that would affect Oman's maritime and economic interests. So who are we talking about, really? The United States and the United Kingdom. Again, Iran, India, and Pakistan. So it's not surprising then that we've seen a range of exercises, some of them more symbolic in nature, but others more substantial. As mentioned by Ambassador Dunford, Oman and Iran, manage the traffic separation scheme that runs through Straits of Hormuz. They, run radars that monitor the traffic, things like that. But military training and joint military training with India has intensified in the last few years, with exercises like Eastern Bridge, which has been running from 2006 onwards, and Nasim al-Bahar, which is a naval exercise.